You've got to see what's happening so that you can do it too. Alright, so before I start showing you watercolor technique and how to get started, I am going to show you some of my watercolors so that you can kind of get an idea of the amount of color that you can get and the amount of detail that you can get with watercolor. And it's a very light medium. It's not like using acrylic paint or the wash or the paints that are in the cabinet in there. You can get kind of translucent where you can see the paper too, or you can get really dark and cover up almost anything. I personally like to do stuff that's a little bit more realistic, I guess, a little bit more traditional. You can get abstract with watercolor. You can do lots of different layering with watercolor. You can do different resists with watercolor. It's just really neat. It's a very neat medium. It's my favorite thing in the world.
You did that?
Yeah, this is all my work, and if you'd like, you can look through it and pass it around. But yeah, so to get started with this project, and we're going to be making postcards, by the way. Postcard size, so you can mail them out if you want, or you can keep them and hang on to them as a portfolio piece or something exciting. But yeah, postcard size. Anyway, so these are my watercolors. This is my personal set from home, and you're going to be working with ones that are really similar. You're probably used to seeing watercolors in like a cake form, where you kind of wet it and then they're the little ovals in the Crayola box. Anyway, you're going to have them in tubes like this. Easy one to open. And you'll have an empty palette that looks exactly like this one, and you kind of just squeeze the color you want into your palette. It doesn't take a lot of paint to do watercolor. Get over that later. And you're all going to get a little piece of paper like this. And it's a test sheet, so you can try out all the different methods and color mixing if you'd like to. I'm going to get my brush wet. And don't tap the brush like this, because you're going to splatter other people's paper. So go like that. And then I'm going to pick a color. I like this dark red color. And then you test it on your paper. And it didn't take me a lot of paint to get that bright of a red color. So now you know. And that's something that you'll learn. Oops, sorry. A little bit awkward. Alright, so with this red swatch that I just made, I'm going to try out a resist technique. It's called salt resist. And this is the only jar of salt we have, and I'm going to keep it kind of up at the front. You can come get it as you need it, but you just need a little pinch. And you drop it into your wet watercolor. And something neat happens. You know how like if you put salt on a slug, it dries out? Well, it's kind of the same thing with salt on watercolor. It soaks up a lot of the water and the color. So when it dries, you kind of have a weird crackling spotting technique. It's very neat. And while that's doing its thing, I'm going to start on another one, which is a crown resist. And I have a couple of white crowns up at the front too, and you'll be able to just share them. And you draw on your paper where you want to keep white, and then you go over with the color. I'm going to use this ultramarine blue. Can you all see where the crown resisted that watercolor and left a little flower? That's a really neat way to kind of save something you didn't want to do. And if you wanted to even, you could put a color down, let it dry, and then put the crown on top. So if you painted over it again, you'd have the color underneath. Let's do next. If you have a straight line in your piece that you want to keep from getting a color on it, and you could put it on top of some place that you'd already painted that's dry, or on a white to keep it white. Just tape works really well. And then you can do bright red. and it'll keep a straight line for you, but don't peel it up till it's dry. And there's a couple ways to put the paint on your paper too. You can do wet on wet, and I'm just going to get an area of my paper wet right here. I'm going to get some different color of blue. I'm going to drop it in. Now I'm going to get another color just so you can see what happens. And it kind of bleeds out into the wet spaces, kind of a tie-dye technique looking sort of thing. It's really neat, and if you have something that's maybe a little more abstract that you're not trying to keep very tight, then wet on wet's a really good thing to do. And then, you know, there's just wet on dry, which is what I've been doing here, which is you have your dry paper and you just kind of paint on it. Another thing about watercolor that you really have to keep in mind, because obviously when it's wet they bleed together, if you have something that you're trying to keep really crisp, you want to let the whole thing dry before you paint close to it, or else the line will bleed and you'll have kind of a muddy looking thing. Actually, patience is a huge deal in watercolor. Anything that you would possibly paint near or over can get muddy really easily. So it's good not to, I call it pet the paper, which is where like, you didn't like this color, so you're going to go immediately back and just start going on, and I don't like that anymore either, so I'm going to go with another color and just keep petting. Your paper will tear, the colors will get muddy, and it just kind of looks like a hot mess. So be very aware and very patient with what you're working on. As far as techniques go, that's about it, but I'll be around to help you, and if you need to refer to this, or you know, you're going to be practicing things on your own, it's really important with any medium just to experiment the way you want to do it, and that's the best way to learn, and you'll just be able to find out through your own practice. Before you start on your final paper, which is that I think it's 6 by 8 is the size of that, I want you to grab a piece of the drawing paper, and I have some out, and do thumbnails. You can see up here I did like about 5 little boxes that are about to scale with the paper that I'm going to do, and I tried out a bunch of different pictures. And I'm going to settle on this fish. It's like the fish in my portfolio, but I zoomed in a little bit. So I drew it big. And about half of the sheet of paper is about the same size as your finished product going to be. So if you draw it on there, you'll have it to scale, and then you can just look directly at it, copy your image, so that you don't draw on your watercolor paper too much. Since watercolor is kind of a light translucent medium, it's really easy to see the paper, see the pencil through the paint, and maybe that's the look that you're going for, and if so, then by all means pencil up your paper, but if not, it's best to have it already planned out so that you don't need to do a lot of erasing and stuff. Also, the erasing does tear up the paper too. Watercolor is really picky about the paper that it's on. It really shows every imperfection in your paper, so it's best to just keep it as true as possible. And then I'm going to just paint a little bit so you can see maybe my process. And I want this fish to be almost a black color. And you'll notice that when I pass out these watercolors to you, that I took all of the blacks out. Because with watercolor, if you put black on it, it just really dulls down all of your colors. And you can get a really dark value that's pretty much black by mixing colors that you've got. And you'll have a color called Prussian blue, which is a really dark blue like this. And I've already started to mix some black from a different project in here, so I'm just going to re-wet it and start working from there. A Prussian blue, or any blue, mixed with an orange value, an orange or like a really red orange like this one. I'm going to use a couple different blues. Get you a really, really good dark color, and it's an alive dark color. Do you see how dark that is? It's pretty close to black, but it's not. And I'll even show you on here. I'm going to start painting his tail.